This is Community Forum, a community service of CAN TV. I'm your host, Juan Carlos Hernandez. Sankofa Theatre Company seeks to tell the stories of Chicago communities at the margins, of people affected by oppression, gentrification, and poverty. Today, our guest is here to talk about the theater's inspiration and the vision of the future. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Well, thanks for coming out. First, let's start off talking about you and how you came to work in theater and how Sankofa was born.
Sure. Myself, I guess like a lot of folks who are in theater, I guess I got interest somewhere in high school. Pretty sure it had something to do with a girl. And at about
in high school, so it was through a drama class or something.
Yeah, I was kind of a troubled little kid growing up. You know, a little bit of smart mouth, and I think somewhere in middle school I had a professor who said, "You know what? You probably would be a good actor." And I kept being like, "No, not really. I don't know about that stuff." And then at some point, I just remember in 8th grade, she put me in something, The Wiz, and I don't know, it was really cool, and people enjoyed it, and finally I felt like I was somewhere where I fit. So in high school, I decided to try it for real in some shape or form, but you know, we went to a school where we didn't really have like a theater program, and you know, in fact, I remember our principal was trying to like actually, you know, take the drama club that we had out, but it was more of a drama club, and it was really, you know, it really rode on the backs of like those who were in there doing the work all the time. You know, it was like a small group of us at first, maybe like 8 or 9, putting up plays, not really knowing what we were doing, but doing everything, lights, building the sets, you know. There was a drama club sponsor at the time, Miss Ferguson, and Suzanne Ferguson, and she would help us. And then Larry Jers came along, and he was someone who was an actor in New York. So he inspired me to go off to college to pursue it. So I ended up at DePaul University at the theater school there. And that's when, you know, that was my decision to take it seriously.
Obviously, investing so much of your time and money into an actual education in theater. Right,
into a university system,
Right, and it was during your experience at DePaul that you thought, I'm going to help make this theater company Sankofa, or how did that come about? Because a lot of times we see these organizations rise and we don't know about their history.
Yeah, I mean, Sankofa was birthed out of three people specifically. Austin Talley, who's an actor in the city and a producer as well. Maria Chavez, who's getting her PhD in Binghamton in upstate New York. She's in her dissertation year. And myself. And we were all friends throughout college. I went to school with Austin, and me and Maria dated for years. And we were just talking a lot about the things that were bothering us and the issues that, you know, at that time there was things like the shooting that happened in Oakland. You know, there was the Amal Diallo shooting that happened in New York. Right. So
he was gunned down by
the policeman. He was
shot how many times? Was it?
I don't remember how many.
It was a whole lot of times. That was the person that was shot.
It's still a point that it, you know, numbers of how many doesn't matter. One bullet, 69.
I know, but it was just so insane.
Yeah, it was ridiculous. And he was reaching for his wallet. But, you know, things like this were going on. And, you know, and, I mean, we were raised in, like myself, I was raised in Liberty City, down in South Florida, which is, you know, I mean, it's like where the docks of cocaine come through. It's like where Scarface is based off of, you know. And so, I mean, we had seen a lot of stuff ourselves, all of us, you know. Austin growing up in South Carolina, and Maria herself growing up in Miami with me. She was part of the drama club. So I think in some sense, creating a theater company was always something that I think was probably something I was messing around with even while I was in high school, not even probably consciously. But in terms of Sankofa, I think it was seeing all those struggles and just feeling like there's got to be a different way that we can be with each other. And so I guess we thought that through the arts, maybe we could teach and find and explore and have conversations with communities, with the people around us about how to better our lives, how to be gentler with each other, you know, more peaceful in general. So I mean, that was where it came about.
Okay, and what does Sankofa mean?
Sankofa itself, it comes from the western part of Africa back in the 1800s. As the story goes, as I understand it, I'm not West African, I was born in the Dominican Republic, but as I understand it, it came from a king or an emperor, however the word would be, who were part of the Asante people, and there were these idioms that they had. It was like something like between 26 and 29, something like this, and probably more that people just knew, but these were probably popular ones. And he had them, or he had, or mandated, or however it was, that artists go around or people go around and actually put symbols that represented these idioms, these proverbs, and they would put them on baskets, on street sides, on walls. It was almost like tagging. I mean, when I read it, that's how I felt about it. Right. I was like, wow, this is like tagging. And so the symbols went along with a proverb. So Sankofa, and you know, pardon me on pronunciation here, but it comes from a proverb that I believe is pronounced something like "Sowi was fina wo Sankofa yinkye." Sowi was fina wo Sankofa yinkye, which means it is not wrong. Loosely, it is not wrong to go back and fetch that which you have forgotten. Okay. The symbol for it is this bird that's reaching back for an egg that's on its back. And so it seems to me, and there was a Laili Muhammad, he was a Buddhist. Yeah. He once quote, I believe the quote is something to the effect that by reaching into the past to get those things that we've forgotten, we understand more about where we are, and therefore have a better control on our future. I'm butchering his quote completely, but he has a more beautiful way of saying it, but that's the idea, that by going to the past, we learn about things or things we forgot. So for us, to me, that idea, you know, as I pitched it to the rest of the game, we wanted, you know, the Theater of the Oppressed came from Maria. That was something, that's actually something she's working on as part of her dissertation. The social justice marginalization that came from Austin, who's right now doing grant work for education for schools in the South Side, to try to build chapter schools down there. You know, with all the shutting down of the public schools, he's trying to do that work. So as you can see, those three brainchilds came together to form the three kind of components of Sankofa, which is working with the community to build work and to understand, which is the theater of press side, and making sure that our work is towards social justice or conversations towards that. And on my end, from the artistic side, it was about creating art that brightens people's day, that reminds us of the good, you know, in each other. Right.
You mentioned, you mentioned a couple of words. I mentioned one, margins. You said social justice. Yeah. Why that concern with social justice? Why reach out to the margins of society and say we need to bring these stories in? And then you said we need to remind people of
See, this is why you definitely should have asked your question, because that is actually the thing that was brought. Reaching back, which is where we were, reaching back, so for me, going back and seeking those plays that were written by Latino playwrights or by Black playwrights or Indian playwrights, or just, for me, it's playwrights that were forgotten. And a lot of ignored because in those time periods, those were playwrights. Those were not the playwrights that were celebrated. We have a part of our history in which playwrights of any color, or playwrights who were non-white, or anyone who was non-white, was, you know, marginalized. We know this. This is a part of our history, American history, and any history of many countries in many different forms for many different people. And so Sankofa speaks to us in that way, and being able to go back and find these plays that were never produced, or these voices that were forgotten, that might help explain where we are, while at the same time developing new artists, new work that can hopefully propel us into a future that, you know, it's more peaceful, in which, you know, people who look like you and me can live more peaceful lives. People who have gone through struggles, and you know, one thing I think that I always like to point out is that Sankofa is a theater company where one of our very first productions was This Is Our Youth, which is a play by Kenneth Lonergan, which is a play where Mark Ruffalo actually played the role of Warren, and when it premiered in New York. And it's about an affluent, well, I believe all three of them are Jewish actually, kids in New York during the 1980s, the Reagan era. And basically, it's one night in which, you know, you have the older guy who he's about 22, the older guy. They're 22, 19, 19. He basically has this big apartment. He got money from daddy, but he's selling, you know, drugs. Okay. You know, and then he's got his friend Warren, who's always coming over, you know, and then he's kind of like the snot-nosed, you know, hoodie kid, you know, can't get right, blah, blah, you know, which I ended up playing that role. When we did it, we switched it and made that role into what I look like. Right. And then you have Jessica, who's also 19, she's described as a Jewish American princess. But she, you know, I mean, her whole thing about, you know, wanting to love, wanting to feel loved, and what does that mean? And seeing potential in Warren, but it's almost like trying to touch somebody who seems so deeply wounded. And so, you know, we took that and we turned it in his hand. And the reason I bring that out is because there's also stories of white folks struggle within the United States of America. So it's not
classes, because one issue we tend to ignore in this country is class and how real it is, at least for folks in the margins, or like you said, reaching back, or in history. There are certainly class divisions in this country, but though we tend not to talk about it.
Absolutely. I mean, it's layered. I mean, like everything. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, socioeconomic statuses. I mean, when you talk about income inequality, for example, which is a huge deal right now. I mean, a lot of people are talking about the minimum wage. You know, where the minimum wage is. You know, is it enough to provide food for family? Is the poverty line, which I believe is somewhere around maybe somewhere between 17,000, 19,000, which has been around there for like ever. I remember when we were growing up. I mean, we lived right under it. You know, and I remember like. I mean, it was around 17,000 back then, you know. So whether or not that actually is enough to provide for a family and home, you know, and what kind of, like, you know, I mean, there's places, I mean, if you travel down to the South Side, for example, empty lot after empty lot after empty lot.
And not only empty lot after empty lot, but also I think a whole culture that's been oppressed, where people, you see it, you feel it, that there seems to be, it almost feels like that to me, like there's no way out, right? That's how it feels like to me.
It feels choking.
Exactly. You know, people frustrated. I've taught before in community colleges, and I would sense that from a lot of my students. They're like, they had such a tough time just trying to get to class, because they had to put food on the table. And they're trying to make something, their lives already have value, but trying to, I guess, advance as far as a career to get more money. You know, it would be so difficult. The weight of that would be so heavy. I'd be like, you guys are heroes and you don't even know it.
Let's take race out of the mix, for example. We were talking about class, right? And let's say that all these problems we're talking about were all happening to one race of people. You don't think that by now, at some point, we would say, yo, we gotta help folks out here. Right. You know what I mean? That's interesting to me, you know, because it's a similar struggle. For example, you have if I say there's a 15-year-old who's working a job at a grocery store, okay, while they're going to school. Okay, the 15-year-old's parents have money and they're just teaching them social responsibility, right? That's a wonderful situation. Now, when I tell you that 15-year-old is at that grocery store because there's not enough food and there's not enough to provide at the home, and that's why they're there, It is not a worry-free job.
Right.
It is a stressful job
Right.
for a 15-year-old. It is beyond learning social responsibility. It is becoming the sole responsible person.
Right. Right.
I mean, they're learning. I mean, they have family members who are depending on them at the age of 15 to create income.
And that is the story of so many people in our communities. And it makes me think, and we're talking about social class, we are talking about race, and it makes me wonder, why are people not more angry? Or I'm sure their anger is there, but or more violent. And because you've mentioned the word peace, why don't we have an uprising in our country? Why do you think? Because certainly we see the class division it's been growing deeper since the 70s. We see the military-industrial complex, get all the money, for these wars abroad, and
the privatizing of the prisons.
Right, the privatizing of the prisons, a prison-industrial complex, another huge.
The WikiLeaks.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
The drug war, right? The drug war. All of these issues. Why do you think there isn't that? There is that frustration, but I don't think it's so big that it's causing this upheaval.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the word peace. How do we approach these problems through nonviolence and peace? Huge questions, I know. And but give us your take on it.
No, I mean it's interesting, what you're asking, because it's in lieu of or in response or maybe just in reflection of what's going on in Ukraine, and I'm sure what's going on in Venezuela and what's been going on in Egypt. I'm sure this is why it's on all of our minds, and we're looking at our own situation saying, well, hey, it's not much different in Gary, Indiana,
Right.
And we're going, and we've been known, Detroit was having these issues forever, and these places are big enough to be their own countries, and, the state governments, and I mean, it's interesting, and I mean, you're hearing about the GOP talking about Jeb Bush. So, I mean, and you're right, we are in a climate where it seems like a lot of different opposing views. We're talking about the middle class, the line between the middle class and the rich becoming much larger.
Right.
That's in the middle class is starting to get closer to the working class or
Right.
the poverty line, if you want to talk about it in those terms. So, I mean, there's definitely even, we're bumping up against each other. I mean,
And we still have the stain of racism.
we have the stain of racism. We've now dealt with post-racial America and what that is, and that's been bashed around in
Right.
all sorts of forums and blogs. And so you're saying, what would it take, or what would it be? Well, first of all, I hope that we never have to have an upheaval and uprising, and that we can solve all situations at a table. I think that's first option, right? I hope that we as being sitting in front of a camera and, who've built all this, know to sit down and still speak to each other.
Right.
Having said that, it's not a singular experience, this life.
Right.
I think understanding that, we are with Venezuela. There is uprisings in our blood. We are in the fight every day. When you're parking, when you tell that stranger this, every day we are. It's there. It's boiling. The other day, I guess what I'm trying to say is there are upheavals happening in every state in the United States of America. We may not be at the level of war-torn all over, but there are people fighting wars every single day, for real. And there's some shootings happening right now.
Right. There was a 16-year-old killed over the weekend, right? I don't know if you heard about that.
No, I didn't. Not yet.
Yeah. So how does theater...
Try to diversify my reading.
And Augusto Boal come into this. He's a Brazilian playwright, and I know something about him, but you're the theater expert here. Tell us about how his ideas, his philosophy inspire your art and these questions we're dealing with in society, of upheaval, of protest, of seeking to bring the margins into the center.
I read Pedagogy of the Oppressed back in the summer of 2012. was about a year after our company was formed. Maria gave us some copies, some printouts of some workshops and stuff back in 2011 when we were first forming the company. We were putting Brainchild together. She said, I want to add this in. I want to put this stuff in. Here, read some of it. I started reading through it and I was like, huh, this is what I did at the theater school. I was like, I know all these things. I know all these exercises. I've done them all. I was like, what is this? She was like, I should read it. I want to put some of the ideas in the company. I said, okay, sure, cool. Sounds great. I love it. It goes with what Austin's talking about. Let's do it. So I came around about a year later to actually sitting down and reading. And it's amazing. So when I came to reading that, I realized what Maria gave us was the Gusto Boa was a gift because it allowed us to do the work that we already have learned and mastered in school or whatever in a way that was totally fresh to all of us. When I read the book in 2012, I realized that at first thought of it as a way to create work, that it was maybe a tool to create work. But what I realized that it actually is a way of healing, a way of having a conversation with each other about what we care about and what is important to us. It was a way to allow us to open up with each other, to gather together, that it was beyond theater. It was a spiritual thing almost. And yes, he used theater games but
how so? Describe to me how one of these exercises would work, because you used a profound word, spiritual. When you're saying spiritual, the meaning is so deep and it can be a transcendent experience. Tell me about that.
Sure. For example, you have a theater game, for example, where they do these tag-ins, right? Where two people. So and so you usually play these with actors, but this is something that's done with either you or Max or any of the fellas back here, and say, all right, so we get you together, stand here, and we have two other people here, right, who are watching you, and we say, okay, you two guys, you're yourselves, and you just saw each other at a cafe, right? Okay, so boom, you yourselves saw each other at a cafe. Boom, we say that you're at the cafe over at Humboldt Park on Division in California. You're like, okay, cool. So you play out a little scene about, say, freeze. We have two other people here tag in, right? And they tag you out wherever you're frozen, and they become you and they continue the story. But we give them the same situation, cafe, and then we say, for example, a shooting is now just happening on Division in California in front of the park by the bus stop. All you heard is the gunshot, everybody just dropped. Play the scene. We can go back and do that in so many different ways, so many different situations. For example, situations of struggle in terms of between two people who are engaging in sex, for example. We have a rape situation, for example. Right. And what comes after it is what makes it transcendent, which is where we start discussing, as we see it play out, we now play out with different people, so different of us in the community, and also then we talk about what other options are there. Right. The options that you took, we create different. I went to an extreme shooting situation, and also we talk about, for example, rape situation, but we can also talk about, anything from how disciplining your child over something, and playing that out in different ways. So it becomes this acting tool, and you use, and one of the ways that it's great is that it starts very casually. So it's not about acting, it's not about being actors, it's not about any of that. It starts off, you're at a cafe with Max, but we add the situations that we know happen that are issues in our world, and so through games and so forth, it allows it to be a conversation, and so you're learning together, and as a community, how to respond to these situations, so that when you're in community together, maybe we may be bold enough to take these actions, and also the people around us bold enough to support.
Wow.
So that we can safeguard each other.
Right. Wow,
So I mean, that's the power of it.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying. You know what I mean?
That's an awesome way of putting it. And unfortunately, we could obviously talk about this for 2 hours.
Sorry.
And no, don't apologize. But we're almost out of time. Give me your vision of Sankofa going forward in a very brief.
Yeah, really short. I mean, we're doing a play festival at the end of April. We're doing a full production of a play called Swagger Like This. Soon, and I mean, we're going to be at a space on Chicago between Ashland and Damon, 1727 West Chicago, a space called the Indigo Web. So we'll be doing performances there and events and so forth. And, you know, hopefully, you know, it's like kind of Ukrainian village, so we hope to kind of spread out and engage with that community and the community around us and go from there.
Great. Thanks so much for coming out and talking about your passion for theater and the ideas that are inspiring it.
Thank you, and thank you for having us again.
Community Forum is a community service of CAN TV. If your nonprofit organization would like to work with CAN TV, call 312-738-1400 and ask for nonprofit services. Tune into Community Forum for local issues and concerns every Saturday at 7:30 p.m. on CAN TV 21. I'm Juan Carlos Hernandez. Thank you for joining us.